Hey, welcome back to Devos with Danny. Today we're going to be taking a look at, again, James. Last week we took a look at sort of that idea of looking at wealth and who do we trust? Do we trust ourselves and our stuff, or do we trust in God? Do we put our faith in the things that we have, or do we put our faith in God? Do we put our faith in our plans, or do we put our faith in God? And today we're going to take a look at James chapter 5, verses 7 through 11, and we're going to talk about the idea of patience. And again, it comes back to that idea of faith. Where do we place our faith? Do we place our faith in God? And do we patiently wait on Him to get us where we need to go? Or do we trust in other things? Do we get discouraged and start looking to other things to provide us with meaning and to encourage us? Do we rely on God? Or do we turn to other things, to society, to ourselves? So let's read. James starts in chapter 5, verse 7. He starts, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, brothers, do not swear by either heaven or earth, or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation." Right? So here, right out of the gate, James starts with this idea of be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. He just starts off with his big idea. He says, look, God is calling you to be patient. He's calling you to stand firm in the midst of difficulty and pain. Because in the end, we are looking forward to heaven. We are looking forward to the end when God is going to right the injustices. He is going to cure what is wrong, and He is going to make the wrong right. And he gives us 3 examples sort of to demonstrate that idea of standing firm and relying on God in the midst of difficulty. He gives us, first off, the example of the farmer. Second off, he gives us the example of the prophet. And third off, he gives us the example of Job. Right? And so for that first example, he talks about the farmer, right? And he says, look, just like the farmer gets up every morning and plants his seed and takes care of the seeds and waters the little plants and makes sure they have everything they need to grow nice and strong. He weeds out all the weeds, make sure there's water, make sure the animals can't get to it, make sure the bunnies and the groundhogs don't nibble at the vegetables and the grain, right? He's out there every day taking care of it, just little by little, watching it slowly grow. And just like the farmer, some of us are putting in work, right? We are investing in our communities, investing in our neighbors, talking to our neighbors about who Jesus is, right? Sharing Christ with our family members or our friends. Some of us are putting in work at our church. We're volunteering hours in our church, in the children's ministry department, in the tech area, through the music ministries. And sometimes it's easy to get discouraged and to feel, am I really doing anything? Is anything that I'm doing actually mattering, right? And what James is saying is, hey, stand firm, work through that. God is causing the fruit to grow. God is causing the grain to grow. He is there. Your work does matter. God sees it, and He is growing it, right? If you're putting in the work, if you're consistently putting in that little bit of work, and you're being faithful in your service to God, God is using that. You know, if you're going out there every day and every week you're putting in a little bit of time and effort in volunteering in your church, if every week you're going out there and you're reconnecting with that friend saying, hey, I'm praying for you, man. Hey, I heard that you're going through this difficult time. Whenever I am struggling, here are some verses I go to. Hey, how are you doing? Have you thought more about this Jesus thing lately? You know, if we're investing in our friends, not being pushy, but just slowly bringing up Jesus again and again into that friend's life, he is working through you. He's working through that. And just like that farmer, God is growing the seed, even though you might not see it, even though it's a slow process. God is using you. And at the end of the days, right, that's sort of that hope that James is pushing out, right? He says, we are being patient until the coming of the Lord, right? In verses 8, he said, in verses 8, he says, be patient, establish your hearts for the coming of the Lord, right? So we're waiting, and when God comes, that work will be recognized. When God comes, he is going to cause some of that work to come to fruition. We just have to wait on God to grow fruit, right? Whereas we're not responsible for growing. We're just responsible for taking care and planting. The second example that James gives is that of the prophets, right? These are people who are boldly living out their faith for God, who are giving messages from God to the people of Israel. And because of their bold stance on their faith, and because of them giving the message of God to the people around them and living out the message of God for the people around them, the Israelites in the Old Testament persecuted them, right? The Old Testament is full of stories of prophets who were beaten up, who were called names, who were spit on, who were killed in many cases because they were boldly living out their faith, and they were boldly proclaiming the truth about what God wanted for the Israelite people. And just like the prophets, there were Christians in James's time who were being persecuted for their faith. And while there was physical persecution, we hear a lot about the physical persecution under Nero, under Diocletian, right? Where Christians were being thrown to the lions for what they believed. A lot of the persecution, though, we hear a lot about that, but a lot of the persecution that was happening in the Roman world was a societal persecution. Before Diocletian, before Nero, a lot of the persecution that was happening was in the form of society turning against you, right? It was, hey, being called stupid. Wow, you believe there's only one God instead of lots of gods? Wow, you're stupid. Wow, you reject the Jewish faith, the tradition that we've believed for years and years and years? You're adding new stuff to this? How dumb can you be? Right? It's this slow ridicule, right? This little jabs being put by society. It was persecution that took place in the form of, hey, wait, you believe in Jesus? Well, I'm sorry, anybody who believes in Jesus can't be a part of my family anymore. And you had Christians being kicked out of their family, being berated by their friends, losing friendships, losing family relationships because of their faith in Jesus. And maybe, just like those people in the time of James, you are finding yourselves being ridiculed for your faith. You're taking a strong stand on the gospel. You're taking a strong stand on your faith. And people around you are telling you how stupid you are, how old-fashioned your idea is, how dumb you are for believing what you believe. Maybe you're losing friendships. Well, you're too judgy for me. And so you're losing your friendships. You have friends or family members or siblings or other people in your life who are giving you a hard time for believing what you believe in, who are giving you a hard time for your stance on your faith. And what James is saying is stand firm. He then says in 11, behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast, right? Just like the prophets were blessed because they stood firm in the midst of persecution. James is saying, hey, have patience. Patiently lean on God in the middle of that persecution. And you're going to be blessed for that. Like, there will be blessing. If not here in this life, then eventually in heaven, there will be blessing because you stood firm in the middle of persecution. And then finally, James pivots to Job and he says, look, just like Job had hardships, had things that maybe that weren't a part of persecution. They were just difficult things in life. They were things like sickness, him being sick, his family members died, his house collapsed, right? These are things that don't have to do with persecution. They're just part of living in a sinful, fallen world. Difficult times, difficult, trying measures. And Job was faithful through the difficulty. That difficulty, it tested his faith, but he stayed strong through that. He was faithful and patient. And in the same way, oftentimes we are dealing with things like sickness. Maybe it's us. who are dealing with illness. Maybe it's friends and family members who are really sick and we are really worried. And we think, God, why is this happening? Maybe it's relationships or jobs that our families are relying on, that we are relying on, right? Maybe it's parents who are constantly fighting, or a job that for your mom or for your dad that they lost in the middle of this crazy coronavirus recession that's happening. I don't know. Whatever it is for you, those things can be difficult. It could be even as so much as seeing natural disaster, right? We see pictures of floods, famines, fires, diseases, right? Coronavirus is a pandemic. These are natural disasters that affect us and that test our faith. And in the midst of that, James is saying, hey, let's stand firm. Let's trust in God. He says, you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful, right? God has a purpose, and he's not doing this to just be mean. He's not letting this happen just to be mean. He is working through these difficult situations in your life. He's working through the period of illness, the period of grieving, the period of hardship that you're going through, and he's using those difficulties to grow you and to stretch you and to move you closer into a relationship with him. And while it's really hard, and while we might not see how God is using those moments at the time, while we might not see how God is using coronavirus to grow us closer to him right now in the middle of it, I promise he's got a plan. I promise he's working something out. And we might not see what it is, but it is there, and he is moving. To be patient and faithful and to rely and lean on God. And so as we close out this section, I want to ask you, who are we trusting? Are we trusting in God? Are we leaning into him? Are we putting our faith in him? Or are we trusting and leaning on something else? Are we getting discouraged and saying, hey, maybe I just need to make a plan? Maybe I need to rely and watch out for myself. Maybe I need to trust in society. Everybody in society is doing okay. Maybe I need to conform to more of what society is saying. I don't know. Who are we putting our trust in? Are we putting our trust in God? Are we patiently waiting on God to make the world right again, right? Because that's the hope that's being held out. We can be patient and we can endure the difficulty because we know that God is coming back. Stand strong in the middle of difficulty, because unlike any other worldview, there is the promise that someday Jesus is coming back and he is going to take this broken and sinful world and he's going to make it perfect again. There is the promise that someday all of the little things that you were doing to serve God through that kingdom, he will recognize that and he will say, well done. There is the promise that for all of that persecution, for all of the wrong that has been done to God's people throughout time, God is coming. Jesus is coming, and he is going to give justice to the people who have been wronged. There is the hope for the future. And we can stand firm knowing that God is going to work things out for good. All right? With that, hey, I love you guys. I care about you, and I miss you guys. I'll see you at the next Devo with Danny.